allow me to quickly bring you back to 2010. Back then, I randomly stumbled upon a review of this one game in a video game magazine. Like on actual pieces of paper, that's how you know this was back in the dark ages. I didn't bother to actually read the words, but the screenshots of the game looked really cool and unique, cause back then the retro art style hadn't been done to death yet. I played the demo a bit, had some good fun, but didn't end up buying it since video games are expensive, and I had the Little Big Planet 2 beta to keep me occupied with anyways. It actually wasn't until later that I even learned it was based on a comic book series at all. Since the game was dope and the art style of the books looked pretty cool, I decided to give it a chance, and quickly fell in love. I mean, with the story as a whole, of course. It spoke to me in a way few other things have, and I've been a big fan of it ever since, actually considering it one of the best things I've ever read. I've got the original box set, in all its black and white glory. I've got this embarrassing crumpled up t-shirt I can never ever wear in public again. And of course finally saved up enough of an allowance in order to buy the game. Though I never got around to buying both of the extra characters, so my life will never be complete. This all led to me getting hyped up to watch the movie, but I was putting it off until I could get some friends together for a big watch along. Cause hey, I'd heard a lot of great things about it, and I wanted to share this great story with some buddies. I eventually tricked a couple friends to watch along with me, grabbed some popcorn, hit play, and... to be perfectly honest, I just felt rather underwhelmed. It was a stylistic marvel, and I could totally see what people enjoy about the film. But I never really felt I saw the characters from the books be portrayed accurately enough to how I'd come to love them. And felt the book's incredible story had lost a lot of its nuances. I mean, sure, the movie is very strictly faithful to the dialogue and carries over a lot of visuals. But to me, it felt like they had to cut away about 80% of the book's contents in order to make it fit into a 2-hour movie. It is impressive they managed to cut the story down to such a size while still having it work, but to me it pales in comparison to the books. I know that's blasphemy, and there's a lot of passionate fans of the movie that will defend it to death, but that's just how I feel. And this just left me feel pretty sad, because there are so many wonderful moments from the books gone missing, as well as a lot of depth and complexity. And I mean, sure, one can argue that that's fine. It's possible for both medias to exist at the same time and be their own things. But to me, that presents a problem. You see, I've talked to many people that have watched the movie, with some loving it and some not seeing the appeal. But I've only ever met a handful that have actually read the books. And I feel maybe some of the people that weren't as big a fan of the movie might have appreciated the books more, as they're much more character focused, putting less emphasis on the action and comedy. So for the longest time, I've been a big preacher of the books, trying to get people to give them a read, but it's very clear to me people find reading them to be too daunting of a task. In a way, I've always wished they had made a 6-part animated series adaptation as opposed to a single live-action movie, as that to me would have perfectly accentuated the characters' energy and emotions while having enough breathing room to accurately tell the story. So, you can imagine my excitement when I months ago woke up to find the good news. The animated Scott Pilgrim show is being made. Unfortunately, it is apparently not a word-for-word remake, as I had hoped, so I guess it won't serve as an easier way for people to experience the books, but to me it still feels like a step in the right direction. So, to celebrate the occasion, I want to share my own personal analysis of the books, as well as put into words why they mean so much to me. Hope you all enjoy. Now at this point I would just like to stress that this video will contain spoilers for the books. And if you're thinking, well, what does that matter? I've seen the movie, isn't it just the same thing? Then oh boy, are you in for a treat. I would highly recommend you to give them a read yourself, but I know a lot of people are not gonna mind either way, so you know who you are. I will also function off the assumption people are already familiar with the general gist of the story, but if you have no idea what this Pilgrim thing is, I'll give the most laconic summary possible. Scott Pilgrim is about a guy's quest to be with his dream girl, literally. And he has to defeat her 7 evil ex-boyfriends in order to do so. I have ironic tongue-in-cheek winning the girl story, but done in a contemporary setting, and also video games are involved for extra style points. However, in actuality, Scott Pilgrim is about facing your mistakes, overcoming one's insecurities and faults, and owning up to your past. Scott's goal on a literal sense is to beat up Ramona's creeps. But in actuality, the ex-boyfriends each represent a stage in Scott and Ramona's relationship, and oftentimes serve more as symbolic obstacles if he and Ramona are to end up with a content and carefree life with each other. The story is thus ultimately about Scott growing as a person and overcoming love's hardships, as corny as that might sound. Now, Scott is on the surface a very goofy character. He's an energetic loudmouth buffoon who rarely thinks before he speaks, but he has a way of attracting people thanks to his dumb charisma. However, in actuality, he is a deconstruction of the stereotypical bumbling hero archetype, as these rude comedic traits actually ends up alienating him from his friends, and beneath his fun exterior is a reserved, insecure guy who is really just trying to keep it all together. He's basically freeloading at a friend's place and has no real income because he's lazy, and the one productive thing he does in his spare time he's not even any good at. Whenever anything bad happens in life, he tries to just look away from it, and he's very self-centered on whatever is able to make him happy, to the detriment of others. I like to put it into perspective with, imagine Goku if people around him actually reacted to the sociopathic shit he tries to pull off with any sense of realism. You would probably grow sick of the guy after a short while. But don't get me wrong here, these are exactly the reasons why I love him so much. It makes him so human and relatable, since we all tend to make a lot of dumb mistakes we don't fully understand the ramifications of at first, and eventually end up wishing we could undo them. But Scott is of course not the only character in the story. The people surrounding him are just as important, and serve to further flesh out his character. So let's leave talking about Scott for now, because I would really like to touch on Wallace Wells. Now Wallace is a great character. He's like the self-aware Casanova, giving off the vibe that he could get any guy he wanted, but is still very down to earth and just looking for a fun time. He's a bit of a sassy asshole, but is also very serious and actually bothers to be productive in life. On a more story-relevant note, he serves as a sort of caring big brother to Scott, as shown in a lot of flashbacks highlighting his unconditional worry for the guy, and his continued willingness to put up with Scott's mess of a life. He also adds a great deal of world building, as he goes through his own turmoils and relationships while Scott's story is going on, and eventually kicks the guy out as he wants to both further develop his own life and force Scott to stop being a pathetic little shit. And I just want to quickly bring up my favorite scene with Wallace in the books, which is ironically also a favorite scene of a lot of people in the movie, however for completely different reasons, and I actually feel they needlessly bastardized the scene and removed a lot of depth from the characters involved.
Is Scott here?
You know what? He just left.
While sure a funny moment, let's compare it to the one in the book. A poor desperate Knives is trying to get in touch with Scott, while Wallace is forced with the burden to reject her, as Scott is too up in the clouds to take any responsibility for his own actions. And even though Wallace is clearly aware that she's got some issues, he gives no sympathy and flat out tells her to leave. Damn, that is stone cold. What a wonderful scene in regards to both characters. We establish Wallace as not being a guy to show pity, and Knives is shown as a broken and helpless girl that has no idea how to deal with her conflicting emotions. Let's talk some more about Knives. Now, Knives is one of the most important secondary characters. If she was not involved, who knows how the story would turn out. For those watching in the dark, she is a high schooler that Scott is dating at the beginning of the story, who Scott comes to regret dating once he meets Ramona. Because of his short-sighted nature, he gets together with Ramona while still being in a relationship with Knives, without informing either of them, and proceeds to dump Knives in a very insensitive way, while proceeding to pretty much ignore her from then on. She basically serves the role of showing how Scott's poorly thought out actions can affect the people around him, and eventually catch up to him down the line. She's a young, sheltered and impressionable kid that falls for a guy who has nothing under control, and is just looking for someone quick and easy to try and satiate his own emotional needs, accidentally leading her on with false hope. He even just straight up forgets that he's even dating her after he got together with Ramona, which he tries to brush aside while the other characters are, realistically, disgusted by his careless attitude towards this poor kid he's warping the mind of. Because of her inexperience and naivete, she comes to see their pathetic little relationship as true love, when it can more accurately be described as petting a nice little kitten. The result is a confused poor cat that doesn't understand why it is suddenly being cast to the wayside, and tries desperately to win back the affection of its owner before eventually turning over to resentment. And much like Wallace, Knives is going through her own story parallel to Scott, especially after she goes out of focus. She ends up tagging along with the group despite her clear malice towards Scott and Ramona, which leads to her, either out of pity or jealousy, revealing Scott's two-timing nature. Of course, at the end she's able to mature and put all of that behind her, which very much reflects that we all go through a similar phase in that age, but on the other side grow into wiser people, learning from our mistakes rather than letting them define us for the rest of our lives. With Knives now established, I feel we can finally start talking about the story on a more beat-by-beat level, and get into what each volume ultimately represents. And to me, the first book represents the complacency of living a relaxed but unsatisfying life, and that peace suddenly being shattered. He has been living an uneventful life for a while now. He's not exactly happy and content, but he has gotten used to things being the way they are. He has his friends who of course care about him, but he is still in need of that human warmth you can only get from a significant other. And then boom, out of nowhere comes Ramona, who suddenly breaks this peace and ends up turning Scott's world upside down. This is of course also when the first ex-boyfriend pops up, who Scott promptly wallops with no issue, showing that he is still living a comfortable life, and for now is just having a casual, sexy relationship with some exciting new girl that he's just met. So far the stakes are fairly low. They are still just getting to know each other, and that romantic feel of becoming intimate with someone new is in full effect. It is not until volume 2 that actual problems start to arise, so I say we just get on with it. And that means it's time to talk about the flashbacks. One aspect of the books that is a harsh victim of the movie's pacing is the flashback sequences. Now, these flashbacks are some of my favorite parts of the books, as they give a deeper insight into the characters and helps reveal what made them who they are now. And I know fully well why these scenes are cut. There just isn't enough screen time available to cover all of these bits, and I would compare them to the extra text found in Watchmen. Sure, you could technically tell the story without it, but it doesn't paint a complete picture, and the characters and events feel incomplete without it. I'll bring up the importance of the flashbacks as I feel they become relevant, but for now let's talk about the second ex-boyfriend, Lucas Lee, who I would say represents the cold feet that comes with getting into a new relationship. The demons of your partner's past slowly come to the surface, and that's really what the fight with Lucas is about more than anything. Because in the book it's all pretty low key, and that is by design. The first guy made a whole spectacle about having to beat up Scott, but this guy just treats it like a little side thing he has to do. They just meet up by a set of stairs, have a quick punch, and then talk it out a little. He revealed Ramona was doing him dirty, although it's never really confirmed whether that's actually the truth. And they do make a joke that he is a good actor, so it's more likely just crocodile tears. But it is telling that Ramona just happens to avoid this particular encounter. Either way, you feel kinda bad for the guy. He seems otherwise nice enough and isn't too obsessed with taking control of Ramona's love life, even being willing to let Scott off the hook despite having shown he's a capable match. I don't want to get too into comparing it to the movie, but I want to quickly point out that this is in sharp contrast to the fight found therein. Instead of revealing anything about Ramona's past, and instead of the low-key locale, the encounter is turned into a big fight scene. Honestly, at times it feels like the movie is adapting the video game adaptation rather than the books, which is ironic because the game is in many ways more faithful than the movie. I can imagine a lot of people going from only the movie to the game could get pretty confused. Anyways, that's all I had to say about Lucas Lee. He's not the most interesting of the exes, but he deserves his spot in the league. He is an important part of Ramona's past after all. But now we're focusing on Scott's past, as Volume 2 ends by bringing Envy Adams into the picture, Scott's own evil ex. She's the cause of Scott's depression at the start of the books, and she used to play together with Scott in the past, until she became overly ambitious and stopped settling for just playing for fun. Much to Scott's detriment. This led to a falling out and her dumping Scott. Now she's together with Ramona's third evil ex, and together they try to make Scott's life a living hell. However, calling Envy just an evil ex would be pretty disingenuous, as she's not really evil, but more just ambitious. A great deal of flashbacks go to show how she's changed from the past in order to be more successful, by for instance not seeing the point of going out drinking, ditching her weeb hobbies, and being fed up with playing video games. It's pretty clear that all of the reasons that Scott liked her in the first place slowly starts to disappear, and yet somehow he still cares for her. We also shown that she is not a romantic, as she shoots down most every bit of affection Scott throws her way. Whether this is also part of her changing is a good question, as we don't really get to know her before then, but it makes you wonder what she even sees in dating him. And we're led to believe that she's the one who did him dirty. Then again, we don't really know if Scott's memories are accurate or not. For all we know, Scott could very well have been in the wrong through their relationship. In fact, this could very well explain why she is so antagonistic towards him in the present. We never really get a good understanding of her ulterior motives. Whether she's just doing it for the evils, whether it's to get brownie points for Gideon, or maybe she just wants to get back at Scott for breaking her heart. However, she eventually gets her own heart broken when she finds out her childhood romance is a piece of shit, which makes her ease up on Scott. Though not enough to receive closure. That's gonna take saving her from another evil relationship to get. Well, that's already half of Volume 3 taken care of. Now there's just Todd Ingram to talk about. So naturally, let's start by discussing the bizarre shopping mall sequence. I will admit, this is probably one of the most strangest and bizarre sequences in all of the books. I'm not even going to attempt to extrapolate any deeper meaning from this bit. It's too out there even for me. However, it does lead to Todd's breakdown, which is pretty great, as it gives a little insight into Todd's character and puts him in a very sympathetic light. Really the only ex-boyfriend to get such a treatment. This probably plays a large part in explaining why Todd is the most popular ex. Now, before we actually get into Todd's relevance as a character, allow me to just get into some more abstract analysis of the story. You see, we as an audience just kind of take all the video game stuff in the world for granted. It's never really explained or dwelled upon for any real length of time. It feels very superficial and like it is just added for the sake of paying tribute to video games. But I like to look at it in another way. Throughout Volume 6, it is established that Scott is very much an unreliable narrator. While ignoring the past, he also likes to romanticize and over-dramatize events. What we are shown in a flashback as Scott fighting to save Kim from a bully is in actuality just Scott beating up on a helpless geek. He also isn't very honest about the one-sided nature of each past relationship he's had, and in general just seems to view what is happening in a bit of a warped mindset. Coupled with his tendency to dream in video game terms, it is a very real possibility that none of the fighting we're shown is actually real. It's all the illusions of a guy trying desperately to disconnect himself with reality. So he tends to view the world in a lens that helps him cope with the hardships of life. This to me puts the book squarely in a postmodern perspective, as we are asked to question what we're seeing is really happening, if any of it. Now, with that in mind, let's look at the fight with Todd in less video game boss fight terms, and more in a sense of how he's superior to Scott. You see, Todd is probably the greatest foil to Scott, as he's basically what Scott wishes he could be. 1. He plays the bass in a successful band. As a quick side note, I think it's absolutely perfect that Scott plays bass. It's like the perfect choice for him, because nobody cares to be the bass player. And to make it even better, he's not even good at playing the bass. It perfectly accentuates the way Scott just coasts through life. So to add insult to injury, not only does Todd play bass in a successful band, he actually knows how to play the bass and looks cool doing it. Third, he's got the affections of Scott's ex. Fourth, has willpower and self-confidence. Fifth, the names are Scott and Todd. 5. Todd is a two-timing bitch, doing one girl behind another spec, just like Scott. 6. Is doing the bespectacled girl with bangs who has a robot arm, who is clearly a better pick than Magic Pixie Girl here, with so many insecurities and complexes. She would make a psychiatrist. Wait, might be projecting a little too hard there. Anyways, the point of Todd's character is to establish Scott's insecurities and overcoming the fear of not being good enough to be with your significant other. And that all being 180'd when it turns out Todd isn't as perfect as he likes to let on. Really, the vegan police could just be Todd's own inner turmoil reaching a boiling point from all his own shit crashing down at once and losing his confidence. It certainly ends with Scott overcoming his inferiority complex and closing out this volume with a good feeling for what's left to come. But before we move on to volume 4, I would just like to give a quick shout out to one of my favorite characters, Cool Robot Ninja Girl. She's just awesome. That's pretty much all I had to say. So now we can move on to volume 4. Volume 4 starts out with this nice little beach sequence, which is very notable as it is one of the few sequences in the old black and white books to inexplicably be in color. The only reasonable explanation I can think of for this sudden generosity of chromatic ink is to really hit home that it's fucking summer now. Yeah, it's summer, and it was snowing at the beginning. That's some visual storytelling trickery to inform the audience that, oh by the way, these characters have been together for several months. This is further compounded by their hair growing out, their clothing styles changing, and general background events happening to inform that Scott and Ramona have been dating for quite a while now. This is important, as Volume 4 deals with the next step of a relationship. That's right, saying the L word, which means we're about to talk about lesbians. But before that, let's talk about the other L word. You see, relationships take a while to grow, and it's hard to tell when the right time is to actually profess that you like the other person. Not to mention figuring out whether to actually even say you like the other person in the first place. You can only have casual sex for so long before you expect something more to happen. At some point you have to make the choice. Do I feel truly content with this person? Or might I be happier with someone else? Wait, let's not talk about her just yet. I want to really quickly also appreciate how the other bit characters in the story also get their own time to shine by themselves. You see, not only does it feel like time in the world passes by, but even minor characters go through their own little stories while Scott's thing is going on. It really helps to ground the story and also accentuates how we can get so caught up in our own little problems that we totally miss what is happening around us. Not to mention, some of the best scenes from the story often happen with Scott not even present. Anyways, what was I gonna talk about? Oh right, lesbians. No, it's time to talk about the super secret spoiler character, Lisa Miller. Now, for those of you who have absolutely no idea who this character is, I told you there was gonna be book spoilers. Basically, Lisa is Scott's childhood non-romantic girlfriend. You know the type, it's a trope that's been done to death, literally. She has even been built up throughout volume 2 and 3 through flashbacks, making her the oldest friend Scott has. And they had their little 3-person entourage together with Kim. She suddenly shows up in the story out of nowhere now to basically serve as the forbidden fruit to Scott, literally trying to entice him despite fully well knowing the guy's already busy dating someone else. And Ramona is of course fully on board the third act misunderstanding train, thinking they're secretly getting something on. This naturally runs fully parallel to Roxy, the fourth ex-boyfriend, who's going for more of a homewrecker approach with her offensive, making Scott think she's already gotten over him. And it is pretty interesting because it almost feels like God just placed Lisa down in front of Scott and went, "Look, why don't you just ditch that uptight whiny woman and settle for something more comfortable?" She's not even trying at all, this chick's practically begging. But, of course, he sticks to his dumb guts, gets the word out, and the ex-boyfriend is literally defeated by the power of love. Yuck. Embarrassing literal metaphors aside, I really like the way this sequence plays out. And it leaves a nice little spot of hope before shit really hits the fan. So, if the fourth volume was about committing to your love, the fifth volume ultimately highlights how fleeting this feeling can be, and showcases the tragedy that ultimately befalls most relationships. Which is where the next pair of exes come into the picture. Now, the Katayanagi Twins of course symbolize duplicity and unfaithfulness. This is, after all, the chapter where Knife spills the beans on the two-timing nature of how Scott and Ramona got together in the first place. And it's no coincidence that Ramona cheated on these two guys at once. As such, they're very confrontational and blunt in their approach, parallel to how a rocky relationship can feel. They are also spitting some hard facts and feeling very confident about Ramona being about to dip. And what's interesting is that they're of course proven totally correct. They have the situation completely figured out and are just trying to talk some sense into Scott so he won't be as disappointed when things eventually fall apart. Of course he doesn't listen because he's an idiot, but their attempt is at least admirable in a weird twisted way. Now, before we can get into my personal favorite scene, we need to first talk about my favorite character, Kim Pine. Or, well, I should specify probably, because there is cool bespectacled robot ninja girl, so there is some tough competition. But I think Kim is interesting because she's almost the complete opposite of the evil ex-boyfriends. Kim is Scott's first girlfriend, and when she's introduced, that's pretty much all we get to latch onto. In fact, it's not even brought up at all throughout volume 1. And then there's not really much to indicate their nature towards each other. They just appear very casual, and Kim of course has that haha I hate things and don't give a crap vibe. But then it slowly starts to become apparent that Kim has some issues of her own. There's plenty of hints to indicate that she has in fact not gotten over Scott yet. From having dreams about the guy, to her kissing with knives burned on by their common lost love, to being suspiciously buddy-buddy with the couple after having had some drinks together. Hell, when he kisses her during the spiritual retreat when Ramona is out of the picture, she actually has a second of hesitation before coming to her senses. And at the same time it's made pretty clear that Scott doesn't really give a crap back. He just dumped her cause he had to move away, didn't really take the proper procedure to break it off, got over it pretty quickly by getting together with another girl, and then eventually met back up again and just saw her as a friend by that point, so he didn't really do much to acknowledge the past that they had previously shared. Again, cause he's an idiot. Meanwhile, who knows what Kim went through since they broke up. She does mention she dated that guy Jason, but it's possible her heart wasn't in it. It's very possible she just kept pining for the guy, while he kept having a good time with a bunch of other girls. And she just had to watch and keep any feelings of jealousy bottled up. Now, you might call me out on doing a lot of speculating and dare say, even projecting a little. But my overall point is that the hints are there. We have enough to speculate on her character, without being explicitly told anything. And I love that. This is also where her being the polar opposite to the ex-boyfriends comes into place. This aspect culminates in my personal favorite scene of all the books, when Bimmy and Jimmy capture her to use as bait for beating up Scott some more. Throughout Volume 5, we see Scott and Ramona's relationship slowly fall apart. even before Knives throws a wrench into everything, there is an air of discomfort to their interactions. It's very clear that the initial romance from the confessing your love has passed over, and now you're left being two responsible adults having to deal with each other. This is exemplified, much like with Scott, in her hair, as it symbolizes how much time has passed and her feeling life is becoming too stale. This is only further exasperated by the reveal, which leads Ramona to really start questioning everything. Much like with Knives, it appears she might initially try to give the benefit of the doubt, but she keeps bottling up the feelings inside her, letting the anger slowly rise until eventually she can't accept it anymore. After the two of them and Kim have had a fun time together out on the town, they proceed home in a harrowing sequence. Just after they've been intimate, she springs the question, and Scott, who is drunk and hasn't given his actions a single thought since he initially made amends with the situation, is woefully unprepared to come up with a fitting defense, if any even exists. She starts to lay her on the guilt, and he's left pathetically begging her to give him another chance. And it says that once he's beat up the remaining exes, everything will go back to normal. He wakes up while Ramona is in the shower and gets a call to help save Kim from the two clowns. Scott hurriedly runs off while asserting he will fix everything after he returns. A confused Ramona exits the shower, revealing that she both did not hear a single word he said and that she's cut her hair short again, a sign of bad things to come. Cut to Scott getting beat up by Tweedledee and Tweedledum, while a groggy Kim is sitting in a cage making a lot of sarcastic remarks. On the surface, a pretty silly scene, but the situation is actually rather grim. Scott is slowly losing faith in his love, and the twins keep piling on the seeds of doubt. Kim tries to assure him that everything will be alright, and while Scott keeps asserting the same, it's clear he has a hard time believing it at this point. And the tragic thing is, we as the audience already know that the twins are speaking the truth, and we know that Scott is indeed fighting a losing battle. However, while the twins are sure of their imminent victory, suddenly Kim gets a text from Ramona. It states that everything will be alright, she looks forward to mending their relationship, and hopes to have a happy future together. Or so she would have you believe. Kim is completely bullshitting. However, this leads to Scott gaining his confidence, the twins getting double KO'd, Kim being rescued and running back home to reunite with his loving girlfriend, who he excitedly tells about his victory and glee that there is only one ex-boyfriend left, and they can be together in peace and harmony until... poof, and she's gone. I absolutely love everything about this sequence. It's so unique and interesting on a meta level. It messes with the reader by planting false hope and then immediately betraying that hope. But the story continues to play it off as if something good is about to happen when we've already been informed everything is about to fall apart. The character dynamics are great. I especially love how the twins are genuinely shocked and confused to hear Ramona write something so heartwarming. I love how far Kim is willing to go to try and save Scott's relationship, even though she is likely just as aware that it's not going to hold out. I love Scott's dumb naivete, thinking that beating up some dumb punks would do anything to save his relationship, and how horrifically his hopes are shattered. It's like, god damn, what a tragic situation. And now we're just left with a depressed Scott lying on the couch trying to escape having to face reality by playing some handheld video games. Christ, it's like a biography of my own life. Even the previous part. I've tried being on both ends of that disappearing act before. It's not pretty. There's no glamour or looking out for the future. There is only the sad fact that life sucks and then you die. I think everything about this is portrayed beautifully. This entire end of Volume 5 is to me as close to perfect as it can possibly get. I love it. We have now made it to the 6th and final volume. Scott does nothing all day but play video games for several months, while his friends come by to give him company out of pity. He's not even playing the bass anymore since he broke it at the start of Volume 5. Kim has left town to be by herself, so now it's only Stephen Stills and Wallace he ever hangs around with. This leads to Wallace, in his most jerk-ass moment, to tell Scott that he should start sleeping around in order to get over the situation, which does kick off the events of Volume 6. It can be split up into two sections. The first being about revisiting the past and attempting to find comfort in the perceived safety of what you're already familiar with, which is probably also Scott at his most horrible. Not only does he just throw these poor women to the wayside and then not give a crap about them, but then he selfishly comes back when he's the one in pain to try and find comfort. Though to be fair, what else is there to attempt? It's not like he's done anything particular that lets him meet up with girls of his past. They just kind of dropped into his life by themselves. And when you're not actively doing anything that lets you mingle around, it's almost impossible to meet up with anyone new. I mean, sure, you could try Tinder, but Scott has been spoiled by the notion of love at first sight. There's no way he can force it at this point, so he's left trying to find it in who he already knows. When it turns out that they have all gotten over him, and he's left with nothing to attempt anymore, his despair reaches an explosive point, and this is when he confronts himself in Nega-Scott. Now, I can imagine some people might think that Nega-Scott is kind of stupid, but he serves an important purpose in externalizing Scott's self-hatred and showcasing how he blames himself for his life going to shit. That feeling of looking into the mirror and seeing someone you hate while trying to disassociate yourself from your own mistakes is sadly pretty relatable. Actually, if we continue to apply the everything is a metaphor aspect, one could make a reasonable argument that Scott is engaging in physical self-harm here. Probably not cutting, a more fitting case would be a little bit of this. And you can tell me all you like that I'm seeing things that aren't there, but the point is he adds enough flavor to the story to allow for such interpretations. After Kim tries to desperately talk sense into Scott, he himself realizes that he can't get over Ramona. So in an attempt to gain closure of some kind, he finally returns home with a goal in mind. To figure out what happened to her, and to get closure. This leads to the second section of the volume and the climax of the story, and brings us to the final X. Gideon Graves. You know, in the books, this guy really gets quite the build-up. You get a couple of scenes throughout implying him as being this threatening cool guy, who is totally in control of everything. And he gets a lot of hype before he meets face to face with Scott in the final book. And when he finally makes his real appearance, he's a fucking maniac. I mean, he's just completely ridiculous. It is absolutely insane how exaggerated and over the top this guy is portrayed. And it's of course a great reveal when it turns out he had nothing to do with Ramona's disappearance and is even disappointed Scott couldn't hold on to her for long enough. What I especially like about the guy is just how petty he comes across. Like, why even bother trying to control this chick's life? Even he doesn't really seem to have a good reason for it. Not to mention, he's just like Scott was with his own exes. Not really taking the relationship seriously until it's too late. Only he proceeded to get obsessed with not letting anyone reject him. This apathy is of course also showcased in his current relationship. Here is Envy, a girl who is right there and clearly cares for him, and yet he's throwing her to the wayside, focusing on his dumb petty obsession with someone who clearly doesn't care for him anymore. Echoing Scott's own past relationships, letting Scott use him as an outlet for finally overcoming his own mistakes. And now, with the last ex-boyfriend out of the way, there's only one character left to talk about. Ramona Flowers. Now, I don't like Ramona. I think she's uptight, whiny, and just doesn't really seem all that fun to hang around with. This also feels entirely intentional to me. Remember, she is the one who's got 7 evil ex-boyfriends. That doesn't happen to someone being a nice little girl. Of course, a lot of her faults turn out to be mostly out of her control, and I will admit by the end she has enamored me as well. But that's coming up, we'll get to the glow. Remember, we're talking from Scott's perspective here, before any of that becomes apparent. I just don't really see what Scott sees in her. But, you know, I get it. Sometimes you just run into a girl that you can't really explain why you have a great attraction towards. It happens. But it is very interesting, cause we don't really have any good reason as to why Scott even likes her. She just shows up and he's completely head over heels for her. And throughout the story she never really shows herself to endear towards Scott very much. You get the feeling that she's for the longest time just dating him because he seems safe, and she's just sticking with the guy because she's afraid of burning more bridges. This reflects in her attitude towards her exes, as she's the one who is always ditching them. She's basically a mess of complexes, insecurities, and a fear of commitment. She acts like a shit towards Scott, but the moment she sees things start to go south, she's out of there. There's no attempts at reasoning, no talking things over, she just gives up right then and there. And really, throughout their time together, so many red flags should have been raised for Scott, to the point he should have probably cut his losses all the way back at the end of volume 2. But again, I get it, Scott, I get it. You're madly in love with this girl, you keep telling yourself it can finally work out, it doesn't, and then you just end up even more bitter from the experience. It's not your fault, life's just not fair. But don't get me wrong, I only hate her as a person. I think she's a well-written character. The problems together never feels forced. Ramona might be a mess of a person who has a cowardly way to live, but it never really feels like stage drama. That's just how her character is. She's flawed and Scott tries desperately to see through those flaws. Even after she ditches him and he's grown resentful of her, deep down he still cares enough to try and win her back. Then again, it's also possible he just goes to finish things off with the last ex-boyfriend as a way to try and be the better man. Then again, if he just gives up then and there, then that's another failure to add to his own record. and he would be no better than she is. And while it's at first assumed that she got back together with Gideon after she disappeared, it's of course revealed that she just took some time off to do a bit of soul searching herself. So this is probably actually the first time she's made a return to a guy she's previously ditched. And I would be remiss to not also mention that a likely reason for her to be so unfair towards Scott is probably because she sees her own mistakes projected onto his. Thus, when she is upset with him, she is in actuality scolding herself. It is clear she doesn't actually hate Scott and still finds him the nicest of the people she's been with, and she wanted to be with someone that didn't remind her of her own mistakes. So when there's any hints that he isn't as pure and simple as she expected, it makes it harder for her to live with herself. I like at the end here that she is finally being supportive of Scott, even with the glow still being in full effect. And let's quickly bring up the glow, because that is a very fascinating aspect to her character. While the glow is on a literal sense a tool for emotional warfare created by Gideon, which causes one's personal problems to manifest inside the subspace highway in their heads, that's a bit too abstract and weird, so let's translate it into symbolism. With it representing anxiety causing irrational thoughts, further exaggerating her mood whenever it becomes sour, and represents her bottling up her emotions instead of being honest and open. It's also revealed that through the glow, Gideon has provided Ramona with a secret space for her to return to whenever she felt she needed his company. Remember, she did like him during their relationship. She named her cat after him after all, and she was the one looking up to him. Thus, the subspace highway into her head represents not being able to escape from a toxic relationship, carrying the effects of it around with you as literal and figurative baggage, which she finally ends up getting rid of when she herself realizes that she also loves Scott. This lets her finally start to show willingness to figure things out together with him, and actually tries to make a change together. I'm a big fan of the ending's open nature as well, leaving the question of whether they managed to make it work up to the viewer's interpretation. But at least now they're truly open to each other and don't have anything holding them back. It's a nice way to bid farewell to the characters, without being either overly preachy or overly cynical. It's just the right balance and a perfect way to end the story. And that's pretty much it. That's all I had to say. I mean, I could keep talking for longer. I did leave out a lot of things, but I feel I've provided a good enough gist of why these books mean so much to me. I've wanted to put these thoughts into words for many years now, as I really feel the books are relatively underappreciated. So this is my love letter and thank you to Brian for crafting such a modern age masterpiece. I hope that if you still haven't read the books, then you might be interested now in giving them a chance. Again, I did leave a lot of things out, and this video really doesn't give the full experience, so you still have a good reason to check it out. But if you have read it and think I'm an idiot with all the wrong opinions, do feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm very curious to hear what you all have to say. And then there is simply the question of the new show coming out. Will it be good? Will it disappoint? I don't know. And to be quite honest, I'm not even sure if I'll be watching it. But it will certainly be interesting to see the series come back into the limelight. And I hope newcomers don't forget to check out the books too. At this point, all I really have to say is, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my thoughts. Oh, and if you enjoyed the video, check out this other one I have on the channel and maybe consider subscribing. I'm hoping to get back into the swing of things and making videos more frequently. But we'll have to see if that sticks. Now, it is my intention to sit down and play video games for several hours. Take care.